Hello, welcome to Eden Hope Academy. We are in week 22, so get out your books, give them a wiggle, and let's get going with Bible. Our Bible verse for this week is by King David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. That is Psalm 23. And I want you to draw out this scene for me. It's green pastures. It's like you're a sheep and he's a shepherd. And I want you to remember this passage because it's so important to remember that God is our good shepherd, that he wants what's best for us. He wants to show us the greenest pastures. He wants to show us the best waters. He wants to see us thrive and grow and just have prosperous lives. So I want you to draw that picture. And the next thing we're going to do is, one of my favorite things. The fingers on the wall wrote, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Daniel read the words as Belshazzar shook. King Belshazzar, God had numbered your days. Your reign is ended. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. So do you know what happened? So let's talk about it. So you have Daniel, and we've learned so much about him already, but the basis of his story was when he was a young man, he was taken from Jerusalem. He was walked 570 miles through the desert in shackles without probably knowing anyone by the Babylonian army. And then he was a slave in Babylon because he was selected by the king's men as someone who was bright and willing to learn and could learn many different things. He was put into the king's palace to be trained as a servant of the king. And so one of the first tests was he didn't want to eat food that he knew that God would not want him to eat. And so he and his friends said that they wouldn't. And they asked the head person to be okay with that. And so that was one of the first things that he did. While everyone else was eating what they knew that God didn't want them to eat as Jewish people, he and his friends were like, no, we want to be set aside for God, even in this really hard circumstance. Even after everything that we've been through, we want to do what God wants us to do. And there were many other trials that I want you to read about. But then we get to the point where he is extremely well respected, and the king has just died. Nebuchadnezzar has died, and his son, Belshazzar, is being very wicked. So what they did was they took cups out of the temple in Jerusalem, and each cup had a different representation and a different meaning. And so the cups were made out of gold or silver or something very expensive, and every one was unique. And each cup had a different symbol or a different meaning to it for the priests and for the temple. And so when Nebuchadnezzar sacked Jerusalem and brought home all of the loot, he even brought home the columns of the temple. And so like Boaz and Jachin are two of the column names, and he brought some of those with him to all those miles, 500 and something miles by foot, all the way to Babylon with him. And so each thing that he brought was sacred, was something that God had anointed. And they had these cups in the storage room, and Belshazzar, his son, knew that these were special cups, and he was goofing off with his friends and was like, let's drink out of these cups at a party. He was not respecting God's things at all. And so he's going around and he's totally disrespecting God, drinking out of these special cups. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, appears this hand on the wall, and it says, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And basically, that means your days are numbered. Like, you've been found wanting. Like it's over, buddy. And so he calls in. He was so scared. He's shaking like crazy. He's shaking. It says his knees were bobbing together like that. He was so scared. And so he asked all of his wise men if anyone could read it, and none of them had a clue of what to do. And the queen was actually not at the party. Now, at that time, if there was a party and the king was there, and there were other women there, that queen would have been there unless she hadn't been invited to the party, which makes you wonder. So it says that she had to come to the party, and she heard what happened, and she said that there's a man named Daniel who believes in the one true God who might be able to answer this question, who is very wise. Now, I think that that's a key component in the story, that she wasn't invited to the party. And I think that's something that we should remember, that sometimes God keeps us a little bit distant from the rest of the world so that he can use us exactly when he needs to, just like that queen. So remember that if you're not invited to something, or that your parents tell you, no, I don't think it's a good idea for you to go to this party or for you to go to this thing, that there's probably a really good reason, and could be that God is just separating you just a little bit so that he can use you just like he used that queen. So put your crown on and tell your parents thank you, and think of something else cool that you can do. So this queen tells him this, and he calls in Daniel, and Daniel says, yeah, it's not looking good, Belshazzar. He says that his days are numbered, and then Belshazzar gives Daniel rewards, and that night Cyrus comes in. That very night Cyrus comes in and takes over the city. So Belshazzar knew it, and it was all because he was blaspheming God by using the cups from the temple that he knew he shouldn't be using. So draw a picture of a hand on the wall and make sure to include shocked party guests. So link it to me. Daniel was taken from everything that he knew, brought into captivity at a young age. Even with all these harsh circumstances, Daniel he continued to follow God. We need to take out that D there. Could Daniel have used to not serve God? What could he have said? Could he have said, oh, my life has been so hard, or oh, I was held in captivity? He could have said a lot of things, but did he? He kept on serving God. What could he have done instead of serving? He could have sulked, right? He could have been like Ahab and put his face to the wall, right? Could have done a lot of things, but instead he kept humbly serving God. Was Daniel humble or proud? And what was the result of Daniel following God? I want you to discuss that with your mom, okay? All right, Nebuchadnezzar was Belshazzar's dad, and he built a hanging garden. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And so the legend is that his wife, Amethyst, she was from Iran, which is mountainous and has lush greenery and is very pretty. And she missed that, and she wanted to go home. And he was like, but I don't want you to go home. I like you. And so he built a mountain in the middle of the desert, and he used a screw to bring up water to the mountain to water it and make it into a garden. And it was considered so beautiful, and she could take walks on this man-made mountain that he built right next to the river, and she could enjoy the lush greenery that she had in her home of what is now modern-day Iran. So I want you to draw a beautiful hanging garden for her. And then finally, Babylon and Assyria were in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This is just like last week, and we've repeated the geography quite a few times this year, so it's much easier to learn. Assyria was to the north, and Nineveh and Babylon to the south, with and Sumeria. So I want you to draw the Tigris and Euphrates River, like we keep doing, and I want you to draw Assyria in the north, and I want you to put a dot for and I want you to put a dot for Sumeria and a dot for Babylon in there. And who was from You're right. Abraham was from He was born there, and then he went to Hebron, and then he went all around. And then like Samaria, we're going to learn a lot about that next year when we talk more about Jesus. All right, so we're going to do Confucius and Buddha. And one of my favorite things about learning about Confucius and Buddha is how the stories are so similar to our stories of Jesus. So I want you to think about that as you're learning about these. These are not religions that we follow as Christians, but it's always good to know what other people in the world believe and why. But these are not, neither of them say that they are the one true God. They just say that they're good people trying to do better. That's how they say it. So remember that. They're not talking about God. Next, we have Nebuchadnezzar. He is just one of the most fascinating people to have ever lived. So I can't wait to hear what you guys find out about Nebuchadnezzar from reading and watching videos this week. But I want you to think about his life journey, and I want you to kind of map out what his life journey looked like. So for example, you could say that he was a conqueror, and then he was shocked about, like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember them going into the fiery furnace, and he said, come out. And then he said that we're all going to believe in God. And then what did he do almost right after that? Then he wanted to worship himself. And then what happened? Then he became like a wild animal. And for 7 years, he lived out and he ate grass. And he had long fingernails. And people kind of were like, oh, stay away from Nebuchadnezzar. And so I want you to look at his life journey. And I want you to discuss that in class. And then finally, we have Esther and King Xerxes. And he is so, their whole story is so neat. And I think we're going to do it, we're going to do this more next week, but I want you on your card to have some information about Esther so that you really understand what we're talking about next week. So I can't wait to see you next week, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.